So if you've been with us the past couple of weeks, you'll know that we've been talking about the book of Galatians, examining our propensity to want to work out our own faith and to look to rules and regulations in an attempt to please God into doing what we want him to do for us. Today we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break from examining the difference between faith and the law. We will come back to it, don't worry. But we're going to head to the Old Testament for a character study of a remarkable woman of faith. I'm not sure about you, but I really like stories that have female characters in them. I don't know if other women in the audience want to read about female characters and see them in the movies. Yeah, I find I don't really connect with movies that are all male characters, like that one where they're all in the submarine or they've all gone to war. And I really like a strong female character, a protagonist who triumphs or who comes through a hard time and finds joy at the end. Well, today I have one such story for you. The story of a woman who lost everything. A woman surrounded by pain who came through her sufferings, not without scarring, but she came through to find that joy is possible once again. This is the story of Naomi, a wife, a mother, a grandmother. It is the story of friendship between two women of different race, a story of tragedy eventually replaced by joy, and of redemption for those in need of a savior, those willing to step out in faith. This is the story where God remains in the shadows and the characters demonstrate God's love to each other. The story of Naomi can be found in the book of Ruth, which by now I'm imagining you figured out. And although the book of Ruth is only 4 chapters long and a beautiful love story, it's still a little too long to read, so I'll just summarize it for you. The book of Ruth is set roughly between 950 and 700 BC, and this is in the years leading up to the reigns of Kings Solomon and David. And at this time, there was a great famine in the land of Israel, which often happens in Palestine, where food is dependent upon the crops, and the crops are dependent on the amount of rainfall that happens. So due to the famine, a man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 sons decided to leave their home in Bethlehem, Israel, and move to the country of Moab. Now, Moab is situated east of the Dead Sea, and I think we have a picture of it up here. So you can see they would have had to go either under or over. I'm guessing they would have gone over the top of the Dead Sea and down to Moab. So it's a bit of a trek. So Elimelech and Naomi settle in Moab, and then shortly after that, Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi with the 2 boys. The boys grow up and marry Moabite women, one named Orpah and one named Ruth. And a few years later, the sons die as well. Neither couple had borne any children, so Naomi is left alone in a foreign land with foreign daughters-in-law and no prospect of happiness that she can see. After a time, she hears that the famine in Israel has lifted and decides to return to her hometown alone. She invites her daughters-in-law to return to their families and marry again. One daughter-in-law, Orpah, returns to her family home, but Ruth decides to follow Naomi to her hometown. Upon arrival, the 2 women do their best to eke out a living. Ruth goes into the farmers' fields to collect the grain left over that wasn't collected by the threshers, as the law in Israel provides for. While in the field, she catches the eye of a rich farmer, and you can imagine how the rest of the story goes, right? A perfect romance. Boaz, the rich farmer, marries Ruth, and she bears a son, who becomes part of the lineage of King David's family, the line that follows all the way to Jesus. So here we have 2 stories of 2 women running parallel and intimately intertwined, the story of Ruth and of Naomi. At the beginning of the story, we learn about Naomi, and she features prominently there, as she does at the end. So she seems to bookend the romance and redemption of Ruth by Boaz. Have you ever noticed that so many stories begin with tragedy? Especially children's stories. Comic book heroes and movie heroes, they often begin with tragedy, such as the death of a parent or both parents, and sometimes the mother, like, I don't know, maybe you remember Bambi or The Lion King, Batman, Superman, Snow White. All these characters who start with a terrible life, they've lost their parents and have to make their way. And then as the story unfolds, we see how the tragedy shapes the direction and passions of the protagonist. Well, here's another one to add to the list. Naomi is left alone after losing her husband and her sons. I completely panic whenever I think about losing Chad or Ari or both. The thought of losing both of them, I'm sure I would see no reason to continue with my life. The pain would be too great, too terrible. Naomi must have been a strong woman to have survived that pain and carried on. The other thing that makes me think that Naomi must have been a special woman is the way her daughter-in-laws wanted to follow her to Israel. Although Orpah chooses to stay in Moab, she initially wanted to go with Naomi. And for these two women to leave their country, their customs, their extended family, and set out for a country where they knew they would not have been widely welcomed, tells me that there was something special about Naomi. You see, Moabites and Israelites were not exactly friendly countries, and there was a lot of prejudice between these two nations. So it's understandable that they must have found something special in Naomi. Imagine, after such a disaster had struck Naomi, Ruth still chooses Naomi's God. Doesn't it make more sense to avoid a God that would allow such tragedy to fall on one woman? We know the two daughters had family to return to as Naomi tells them to go back to their mother's homes. And we see in Naomi a desire to see the welfare of her daughters turn out. She encourages them to stay, start a new life, something she doesn't feel that she can provide for them. And yet, even although Ruth has a place to go, she begs to stay with Naomi with those very, very famous words, "Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Maybe it was dutiful loyalty. She felt it was her role as a daughter-in-law to follow. Perhaps. But I'm more inclined to believe she saw in Naomi something she wanted for herself. I know I feel drawn to people who have a genuine passion for God. I want to be around them and learn from them. So Ruth comes to accept the foreign god Elohim as her own God. And we know that she accepts him by the way she refers to him. She reaches out and calls him Yahweh. Nations other than Israel referred to God as Elohim, a foreign god. But the nation of Israel itself referred to God as Yahweh. So when Ruth uses the term Yahweh, we know that she is conveying that she sees God as her God. So Ruth, this foreign woman from a country despised by Israel, becomes a great-grandmother to the King David and a part of the lineage of Jesus. Yes, a Moabitess can figure prominently in Jewish history despite the prejudices of the Jewish nation. So Ruth follows her mother-in-law because she sees in her an open and honest dealing with life and faithfulness through pain to the God of her own nation. When we first hear from Naomi, we hear her speak in the story. She is broken and devastated. She's gone with her husband and sons to a foreign land to escape the famine in her country. Her husband dies, and sometime after that, she's single parents for a while. And then the sons marry women probably around the age of 15, and then shortly after that, they die in childless marriages. We don't know exactly how long she and the daughters lived in Moab before they decided to return, but at some point she gave up trying to make it work and headed for home. Life was not easy for Naomi. All her happiness had been shattered, all her dreams of grandchildren and growing old with a spouse and her sons gone. On the road to Bethlehem with her two daughters-in-law, she launches into this huge lament about her painful lot in life. And there is a great sense that God has allowed this pain in her life and that she is powerless to change it. She wears her pain on her sleeve. Her lament, although spoken to the daughters, is clearly aimed at God. How could you allow this to happen to me? She tells the girls that God has gone forth against her. And when she arrives in Bethlehem, she tells the villagers she is empty. She went away full, and God returned her empty. He has pronounced an evil sentence on me. He has cursed me. These are harsh words. And it is at this moment that she changes her name from Naomi, meaning pleasant or my pleasant one, to Mara, meaning bitter. And the author uses this name to contrast the movement of her spirit from happiness to despair. So what do we do with this big rant that she goes on? Does it suggest she is a weak, pathetic woman who has lost her faith? A bitter old lady who needs an attitude adjustment? No, I don't think so. I think it's common to respond to pain and suffering in our lives with incredulity. This can't really be happening to me, can it? With anger and horror, overwhelming sadness and depression. Do we not all respond to pain in our lives with the question of, how will I ever survive this? Given the loss Naomi had faced, I would say she was entitled to her feelings of abandonment and anger. Naomi's rant is not the only one found in the Bible. The Anchor Bible Commentary notes that this style of lament is not foreign to the Bible. We see it in Job, in the Psalms, in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel, many of those prophets, and also of Jesus as he faces the cross in the Garden of Gethsemane. Specifically, the Bible commentary says, complaint in the Bible regularly amounts to bringing a formal case against God. It calls his fairness and faithfulness into question. And in many instances, there is no answer to the apparent injustice. In all these cases, the complaint is not answered with a satisfactory explanation of God's ways. Rather, the matter is transferred into the future, and what resolution there is comes in the form of a new task or a vocation for the persons involved. The only assurance is that the faithful God is, in spite of all appearances, still about his business, and his people should be about theirs. Elijah complains and gets a new set of tasks in the book of Kings. Jeremiah complains more than once and is called anew in the book of Jeremiah. Job complains. Indeed, he rages against the door of heaven and gets no satisfying response, but only the assurance that God is still in charge of the universe and an unexpected vocation to pray for his unhelpful comforters. And the same can be said of Jesus when he makes his cry on the cross. So what do we learn from this? Railing against God is common. He can handle it. True women and men of faith have railed against God. Those who trust in God, who look to God as someone to commune with, are not afraid to pour out their complaint and their despair to him. A complaint or a cry to God is not a sign of someone without faith, but of one with faith. To pour out your heart and pain with abandonment to God is a sign of faith. One commentary said, not only is complaint tolerated by God, but it can even be the proper stance of a person who takes God seriously. It's okay to tell God you're not happy. It's okay to complain. It's okay to lay out your despair and your disappointment, your hurt to him. It's a mark of faith when one is comfortable to pour out their heart to God, not in threats of abandonment, but in an expression of communion, of connection. Let's deal openly and honestly with God in our sufferings. Could we even dare to deal open and honestly with each other in our suffering? It would seem that Naomi had not lost her faith in God, but rather it is her faith in God that allows her to feel safe enough to cry out bitterly to God. And yet, God doesn't really answer, does he? We don't always receive an answer to why there is pain and suffering in our lives. Why did he allow the death of her husband, of her sons? God remains silent, but continues to exert his faithfulness and encouraging hope in who he is, our Savior. And slowly, as the scene in Bethlehem unfolds and Ruth meets Boaz, Naomi sees an opportunity for financial and emotional stability for Ruth and for herself. And hope is once again ignited in her heart. Hope that she will feel joy. Not a restoration of her former happy days with her husbands and sons. That's not possible. But hope of a new vocation, to care for the child of Ruth and Boaz, to be a grandmother to a child in the lineage of King David. But in the middle of her pain, she doesn't know that yet. She doesn't know what the outcome will be. She can't see it. All she can see is her pain. And when we're in the middle of pain and suffering, we can't see the outcome either. Who can? In the middle of the pain and all the crap that life has dealt you, it's so hard not to just stand up and scream out, I am not all right here. I am falling apart, and I don't know how to go on. I have nothing left to live for, and I can't see a way in the darkness. And this is what Naomi did on the way to Bethlehem with her daughters, and then again when she arrived. Can you imagine if I came to church today, and upon being asked how I was doing, I barked out, I am terrible. God has abandoned me. Don't call me Sasha, call me miserable. Thanks. You'd probably be a little shocked. As were the villagers in Bethlehem when Naomi returned with Ruth. I'm sure they were startled. Don't we all really prefer to hear stories of hope in sorrow and victory in trial? Another person's pain often makes us feel uncomfortable. And we kind of try to cover our discomfort with silly words that God knows what he's doing. It was that person's time to die. God must have a purpose in all of this. How much pain do we inflict on each other by not allowing ourselves to fully embrace our despair and the despair of others? Larry Crabb says it well. The Western Church has become a community of either the victorious or the acceptably broken. Either we speak glowingly of our love for Jesus, usually because we have the blessings and they are abundant, or we struggle nobly through hard times, convincing others and sometimes ourselves that we are doing better than we really are. With each other, we are more proper than real, more appropriate than alive. Naomi broke the rules. She stood before her community admitting who she was, rather than pretending who she should have been. The result was more pain, and although not right away, more hope. Had she deadened her pain and behaved appropriately, she would have missed the joy of Christ. When you hurt openly in the presence of God, hurt openly in the presence of the few who provide you with a safe community. Feel your pain. Regard brokenness as an opportunity, as the chance to discover a desire that no brokenness can eliminate, but that only brokenness reveals. That's from Shattered Dreams. Naomi refused to deaden her pain. She embraced it. Even in the midst of her depression, she retained the capacity to desire something more. People who insist on happiness never find joy. If we allow ourselves to only feel desires that can be met, and we deaden the desires that are not met, we will always seek superficial happiness. And we'll be happy for a time, maybe even a long time. But we will never live for the desire of knowing God. We will only live for the desire of happiness. Desperate people, shattered people, discover the desire of knowing God. Happy people never do. And yet, as I read these words, something inside me screams out, I don't want pain. I want to be happy. I don't want suffering. And I think I want to feel good all the time if I'm entirely honest with myself. Of course, none of us walks towards pain. None of us ask for pain. But the reality is that we all have times of suffering in our lives. Maybe some of you are suffering right now. Perhaps it's something you had never imagined you would have to face. The loss of a spouse, a friend, a child, the failure of a marriage, the betrayal of a spouse or a partner, horrific illness, abuse. Or perhaps you hurt because of desires that have not been met in your life. You desire a partner who loves you, who respects you, a career that you feel challenges and fosters all your gifts and talents, enough money to stay afloat without sinking into more debt. All these things we face daily, all these things that threaten our dignity. Take comfort that just like in the story of Naomi, God is working for our joy while we are in the middle of our pain. No, we can't see a way out, but God will walk through it with us, and there will be hope for joy. Embrace your pain. Rant at God. He can take it. Tell him all that you are feeling. He may not respond. He may postpone it, but he may. Do not lose hope that the pain you now face provides a possibility for God to become real and powerful in your life. Something that I hope we all desire, that God be real and powerful in our lives.